Sorry. Hi, everyone. We're just waiting a couple more minutes for a few more people to join. As we're waiting for everyone else, if you could edit your name to include your organization and the place that you're joining from, that'd be really helpful. Hi, hello to everyone who just joined. We're just waiting a couple more minutes for everyone who's accepted the invite to come in. In the meantime, if you can include your organization and the city that you're joining from in your with your name, that'll be super, super helpful. Hello to everyone who just joined. We're just waiting a minute more and then we'll kick us off on the session. If you could edit your name to include your organization and location, that'd be super helpful. Awesome. I think we can start now. Welcome to the third session in the COP series on dual gen approaches. Can't believe we're halfway through the series already, and we're very excited to have many of the old faces and some of the new faces join us for the session today. In today's session, we'll be discussing about social franchising models and how they're implemented and learnings from its implementation in context of displacement. So jumping right in, why are we discussing this topic today? We know that children and families in humanitarian emergencies around the world continue to lack affordable, accessible, high-quality childcare and preschool. According to a report that was published by the World Bank, the social franchising approach has garnered attention for providing high-quality childcare and preschool in low-middle income countries. Many benefits have been highlighted, like the model can help build self-reliance for refugees. Children can access safe spaces, interact with peers and a caring adult, have a space to cope with trauma. It can also give primary caregivers an opportunity and time to acquire essential services like food, shelter, and other important services as well. While the model has been tried in sort of various urban low-income settings, there's more to be learned here, especially in the context of adapting and testing this model in the context of refugee camps and settlements. So today in this session, we're largely covering sort of four objectives. The first is really to understand what the social franchising model mean, particularly in the context of early years and displacement settings. Second is to understand the potential where the demand really comes from by understanding the current landscape of childcare in high density informal settings. We'll also talk about challenges and opportunities associated with implementing this model in a cost-effective way and with scale and quality. And lastly, we'll discuss the role of sort of partnerships, if any, in supporting the implementation of social franchising models in sort of crisis context. On that note, I am very excited to introduce our two presenters today. We have Children in Crossfire and Kidogo, who will help us get deeper into this topic. Kidogo is a social enterprise that improves access to quality, affordable early childhood education and care in low-income communities in East Africa. Kidogo uses an innovative social franchising approach to identify, train, and support female entrepreneurs, also called as mamapreneurs, to start and grow childcare micro businesses. Kidogo will be sharing learnings from their program in the Kakuma Kalaboy refugee hosting area in Kenya's Turkana County. Our second presenter is Children in Crossfire. Children Crossfire was founded in 1996 during the Northern Ireland conflict. They currently work in Tanzania and Ethiopia with local partners, especially on issues of early childhood education. Children in Crossfire will share findings from a recent baseline study that they conducted with about 100 daycare centers in high-density areas of Dar es Salaam. They will share top-line findings from the survey, but also specifically explore the relationship between ECD and women livelihood and empowerment and well-being. From Kidogo's side, we are excited to be joined by Martin, who's the partnerships manager, Edith, who's assistant franchising coordinator, Cyril, who's the health, nutrition, and wash assistant, and Elaine, who's the director of policy and partnerships. From Children in Crossfire's side, we have Kanupriya, who will lead us through the baseline findings. She's the head of education and MEL, where her work focuses on evidence-based transitions of government policies to practice in low-middle income countries. A quick sort of look on what the agenda is going to look like. In continuation of our objectives, which is to foster connection, we will break you up in smaller groups where you'll just get to meet the rest of the group and begin to start thinking about this topic of social franchising. We will then have the presentations by Kidogo and Children in Crossfire, followed by a Q&A, and then we'll end with a short reflection activity and next steps, depending on the time that we have left. So on that note, we're going to break you up into your small breakout groups. Tejaswini is going to help us put us in our respective groups. In our group activity, we'll be introducing ourselves. We have a lot of people who are joining us for the first time. So keep the introduction sort of brief about your name, what your organization does, and where you're based. We'll also discuss how familiar are you with sort of the social franchising model and approach, 5 sort of being very familiar and 1 being not familiar, and also spend some time towards the end to discuss any questions that you would like to sort of get addressed through this session. Towards the end, if you can write down 1 to 2 questions as a group, which you'd like to get addressed, that'd be super helpful. We've created a Jamboard, which we will share with you in the link shortly. The purpose is really for you to list down the questions that you've discussed in your smaller groups for the benefit of the larger group. And then we'll come back and take a couple of seconds to sort of review the kind of questions that are coming up. It'll also give an opportunity to our presenters to just have a sense of the kind of questions that you're thinking about and sort of try and incorporate that through their presentations. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pass it on to Tejaswini to open the breakout groups and let you guys go and have interesting, fascinating, fun discussions about this.
Opening the breakout rooms.
And share the question with the larger group.
Hi there, Craig here. It's easier for me to come off mute. There's just one question from my mind, thinking of social franchising and ultimately it being a business making ends meet. being a going concern, etc. But how does it cater for the poorest children? And therefore, even in sort of the high density, very low fees paying childcare or daycare, you can find that the most poorest children are excluded. So I'm interested to think through from a social franchising perspective how all children are reached.
That's a really important question. Anyone would like to add to it or voice out another question?
Yeah. Thanks, Priyanka, and thanks, Craig, for that question. Hi, everyone. This is Reza from Open Capital. Maybe just to build off that, but also from now another aspect in terms of continuation of operations, I think we need to figure out sort of challenges to both sides of the spectrum. One is how do we make sure that we don't have anybody excluded? And then on the flip side, what does sustainability look like as well from an operational perspective? So I'm curious, I think two key questions that came up in our breakout group. One for Kidogo is how does ability to pay differ for them in a refugee setting versus some of the more traditional settings that they operate in terms of low-income urban areas? That would be useful to understand. And then second, for children in Crossfire, trying to understand from their baseline study how much they've seen with regards to women's livelihoods and empowerment. How do they look at that? Is that within sort of the ECD space, or is it more broader? Because that would also be a useful learning to look at more holistically as well.
Thanks, Reza. We have time for one more question.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lukoro from Makasi Rescue Foundation, and I would like to ask what about the model application in the refugee setting, as in urban and in camps? Are there some differences, variations? As if we talk about livelihood, for example, what are the space consideration in the urban setting as compared to the camps? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you to everyone who managed to share their questions. But we'll have multiple opportunities through sort of the session to ask your questions. So feel free to leverage sort of other spaces as well to ask your question. On that note, I'm going to pass it to the Kidogo team to talk more about their program.
Hi, everyone. Priyanka, I'm just confirming if my audio is okay. Is it okay? Okay, fine. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Kieng from Kidogo. I have a couple of my team members around. There's Elaine Wasuka, there's Cyril Sigoni, and then there's Edith Angela, who are part of the Kidogo team. Specifically, we have who've been on the ground in Kakuma. So they'll be in a position to shed more light on what is happening on the ground. Just as a brief for who is Kidogo, what does Kidogo do? So Kidogo currently is the largest childcare network in Kenya. We use social franchising approach, ideally conversion-based social franchising, conversion-based franchising approach. Our main aim is to improve access to quality, affordable childcare in the low-income communities. So just introducing social franchising, how does it work for us? So as I mentioned earlier, our approach is conversion-based social franchising approach, where the main aim is upskilling women who are running their own childcare micro business or who aim at starting their childcare micro business. The main aim is addressing the problem of low inequality access to childcare in low-income communities. Specifically, how does our social franchising approach look like? From the initial process, we'll start with the mapping process, and ideally, our mapping process take two approach. The first approach is mapping out the respective ministries that we would work with. In Kenya, we have what we call counties. Typically, it's Kakuma. So Kakuma has a lot of control from the national government as much as there's the county government, the local government. So ideally, we have a conversation with so the mapping, we'll start with the mapping process where we work with the respective department ministries that we will work closely with, that is education, health, social service. And then at that point in time, we are allowed opportunity to do now daycare mapping. We go to a community, do mapping, and then ideally we have some set of criteria that we have developed over time for the last 8 years, just to hone in into how we are so specific in the different line items that we would be looking at. Then after selection, specifically we are looking at informal quality daycare centers in these local communities. Those are the people that we will be working with, but because the main aim is upscaling them. And then ideally after that, they enter through a 3 months program. Ideally what we call it quality improvement program. Recognizing childcare is a trust business. It's not an automatic. So if you leave someone with your child, it's usually a trust business. So they go through the 3 monthly program, which includes early childhood topics on early childhood development and entrepreneurship. It's a 5-day program, and then a 3 months training that they will receive. 3 months, sorry, mentorship that they will receive. So quality assurance is key from how we do from the beginning until the end of the program, even continuously with the program. So in the 3 months program, we do quality assessment. We have a Kidogo quality assessment tool that we do have. So we from the time that we started with them in the quality improvement program to the time that they finish, our monitoring and evaluation team will evaluate them. We usually have a 3-color coding, the red, yellow, green. When someone scores red, which means that at that point in time, we can't continue with this person. When someone scores yellow, this is someone that we will be rethinking if we're working with. We keep them on waiting. And then green, those are the people that will go to conversion. We'll convert them now to franchisee. Becoming a franchisee comes with different benefits. So there's center innovation, branding, there's access to our Mamapreneur app. And finally, after this, they become part of the franchisee support as an ongoing support. So we'll offer mentorship, coaching, and what I really mentioned, quality assurance is key to whatever we are doing. There's one thing that I didn't mention, recognizing childcare is a lonely business, and recognizing that the people that we are training are at different level of training. So one of the key things that we've done is when we do after onboarding them, we group them in community, what we call a community of practice. We group them in a group of 5, from 5 to 6 groups in groups, where this gives them with this grouping, it offers them some sense of support. As we know, they tend to learn much better by themselves as we offer support. So that's ideally our social franchising program. But to enable this, there are 6 components that drives what we do. We usually call it the Kidogo way approach. One of the The approaches is safe and stimulating environment, nurturing caregiver, where we train the caregiver, play-based activity is an aspect of health, nutrition, and wash. We have our team, and I think just from our learning, so, and then our team, Cyril, you can give three key learnings from a health, nutrition, and wash perspective. What we've learned, typically what we do, what was so different when we were doing at an urban region compared to what we did at the refugee camp. Cyril, are you there? So just 3 pointers of what we've learned, and then 1 key success from our health, nutrition, and wash.
Hello, Martin, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Hello, team. My name is Sogoni Cyril. I hope I'm audible enough. Maybe just give a thumbs up. I've been acting as the health, nutrition, and wash assistant in Kakuma and Kalubeye. So maybe just to give 3 main things that we learned implementing our projects in the Kakuma to Kalubeye area is, first of all, food security is a very big, food insecurity is a very big discussion in Kakuma and Kalubeye. As you know, organizations like the World Food Program are majorly supporting the refugees with food rations, just to ensure that they have a constant supply of meals throughout. And that is quite different from the other very urban centers that we've worked in, because most of these refugees or people seeking asylum do not have any livelihoods. They do not have jobs. So for them, they entirely rely on the food rations. So as Kidogo, usually we do give, initially we were giving an egg a day, at least 2 times a week to every child in the network. And we switched that to porridge, fortified porridge for the same duration. But when we ventured into the Kakuma and Kalubeye area, we realized that there are a lot of systemic challenges that we might have we might that influenced our decision to not introduce the feeding program. Of course, there's the dependency issue, among others. And then we also noticed that it's very important to coordinate with the other partners that are already doing some of these interventions, because as Kidogo alone, we realized that our standalone interventions might not bring the impact at scale to the children, because there are so many challenges. We have the income challenge, we have challenges with shelter, so we have cultural challenges, because for example, if I can just paint a picture, you go to a daycare center, you find that particular center is housing children from the Somali culture, it's housing children from Burundi, it's housing children from Congo. And when we did our survey, interacting with some of the parents, because in Kidogo, we have 2 types of centers. We have those centers that have a feeding program within their normal programs. So the parents pay some certain amount of money to have their children access some foods. But then we have those parents who cannot afford to pay for meals at the center. So we usually advise them to carry maybe some packed lunch, clean packed lunch, fresh packed lunch for the children. So you find that in Kakuma, it's quite tricky, because in a setting where we are housing so many different cultures, for that center to harmonize the different tastes, the different preferences, the different economic levels of the parents, to create one food that can be suitable and sufficient for all the children has been hard. And then we also have some parents who feel that the children cannot feed, maybe with you find that a Rwandese parent will not be comfortable the children having a same seating, a same meal as their Somali counterparts. So the cultural, I think culture has played a very important part, just to inform how we tailor our programs to fit that specific context. So like I said earlier, on the cultural issue, we had parents' engagements where we interact with the parents themselves. Let's say if the parents from the Rwandese culture, if we're able to meet them, we meet them, and we take them through menu costing, nutrition education, just to ensure that whatever menus they eat in their households is still nutritionally adequate, it's still nutritionally dense, and it's diverse. And then we also do the same for those of the Somali culture, just to help them have an overview of what kinds of foods they need to be feeding their children. And of course, I mentioned that livelihoods is an issue. So many of them do not afford, the 3 meals a day for the children. So with the little money that they're getting from the various opportunities they're venturing in during the day, we just try to ensure that it's nutritionally adequate for the children. Another challenge is water. Because we also have a wash component, we felt it's very important to integrate wash into nutrition, because in Kakuma, it's an area where water is scarce. So we have issues such as diarrhea with the children. And then we also have diseases such as malaria and upper respiratory tract infections. So we felt that it's very, very important to integrate this wash component into our projects there. But then here is where the difference comes in. In most of the other regions where we operate in, you find that there is availability of water is not really challenging. You find that in some places it's challenging, but if they go without water, it's maybe for 2 days or 3 days. But in the refugee camps, you find there are some camp settlements who go without water for even up to 3 weeks. And, given the temperature in Kakuma and Kalobe, it's very hot. Just to give perspective, at times it gets to 40 degrees Celsius. And these children are learning in, previously they were learning, some of them were learning even under the trees. They didn't have shelter. So you find in the afternoon, especially from around 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., which is the time that most of the home-based centers operate, it's very hot. The classroom or the daycare room is in chaos because these children just want to access some water to drink. So what we did is we came up with an intervention to give them, just water reservoirs where they can be able to store water so that in times of maybe that scarcity, they are able to provide clean water for the children to drink and also clean water for the children to wash their hands. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything. So yeah, I think, so for us, I think those are the main challenges, but there was also the in terms of hygiene. We know for a very long time, the issue of open air defecation has been a great challenge in the refugee setup, especially Turkana West, and that is both for the host community and the refugee community. What Kidogo does, we do not construct any latrines or hand washing facilities for them, but in Kakuma, we came up with this package where every center received a child-friendly pit latrine, just a basic pit latrine, and these caregivers were taken through, training on how to manage waste better, because some of them you find the child to potty ratio is even maybe 20 children using one potty at the center. So it was a very big challenge because you find the caregiver has to double. They have to take care of the children, in terms of hygiene, and then they also have to go on with their regular activities. So it was quite stressful, but having a pit latrine there, because of course, we acknowledge that the other partners like Displacements Japan are doing so much to, help the communities sustain themselves by, just creating improved latrines. But then Kidogo came in and added to, because most of them are communal. So you find the children coming from the center, they go and access the latrine in the community and then come back to school. So the challenge was that some of the children, when you release them to go to the latrine, there's the safety issue, there's the security issue. These are young children, these are refugee setup. There are those, issues like, children getting lost because they went to the latrine and came back. So bringing this latrine facility close to the classroom, close to the center, it's really helped, us to bring down the rates of, childhood diseases, especially diarrhea in our centers. Martin, I don't know if there's anything I'm leaving behind. Maybe.
Of the thing. So yes, really from health, nutrition, and wash. And then there's an aspect of parent and community engagement. It's one key aspect within our programming. And then the biggest thing is business and administration. So the entrepreneurial part of it. I think I have the very last, I have a member of our team who can give a context for in terms of our franchisee program. Key, what is the key success from our franchisee program, especially from training and mentorship and the franchisee, the business aspect. Edith, if you can come in.
Hi, everyone. This is Edith, the Assistant Franchising Coordinator in Turukana, that is in Kakuma and Kalobeye. So whatever worked well for us was the trainings. We normally conduct trainings that is trainings per term, and whatever works is in the communities that is in Nairobi and Nakuru and Mombasa. You'll find that we will facilitate for the transport for the caregivers to attend trainings.
Sorry to cut you off, Edith. We can't hear you.
Edith.
You can't hear me?
It's breaking up a little bit.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, but it's breaking up a little bit.
Oh, sorry there. Okay, then I'll start over. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So, hi everyone. I'm Wanjala Edith, the Assistant Franchising Coordinator. And amongst whatever worked well in the urban centers, but really needed some more effort in the host and the refugee communities was the trainings. We normally have the capacity buildings, which is done in form of trainings, the ongoing intense mentorship from one of our qualified staff, and then the COPs. So to start off, I'll talk about the trainings. In the host and the refugee communities, we came up with a way to facilitate them. You'll find that the community is diverse, and also due to the dynamics, like most of the RLOs are so far away from each other, so they couldn't access a certain venue or a strategic venue until you stand in for the transport, which we don't do it in the urban centers, that is in Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa or Nakuru. And also you'll find that
Sorry,
we're
Edith,
very
we keep on
comfortable, like the host, because you'll find that most of them was best. But for the RLOs, hello?
Sorry, can hear you.
Hello? You can hear me? Hey, Martin.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that in the host community, they preferred attending the trainings on a Saturday, but the refugee communities, that is Kakuma Refugee and Kalobei Settlement, they preferred attending the trainings on a weekday, because you'll find that most of the RLOs were operating in the afternoon hours. So for them, they were comfortable with attending the trainings on a weekday. To go on the mentorships, we normally have our qualified staff who goes around in those daycares or in the schools which are having the ECDE to offer the ongoing mentorships. And we do that, as I've told you, we have the trainings that are done. I can just make you one, like positive discipline. So when positive discipline is trained this week, or maybe this is the start of the month, so our team, one of our qualified team will go around in those daycares, sitting down with the caregivers so that they can ask them if they really understood, if there is somewhere they really need maybe some, they need some clarification, or what can we do to also cascade the same to the learners, because we understand once we empower the caregivers, the children will also get to benefit from it. So we normally have the ongoing weekly mentorships, and they are also, you'll find that in urban centers, that is Nairobi, Nakuru and Mombasa, majorly, like you'll find the A4 not going a long distance, or the field officer not going a long distance to access an RLO or even a daycare. But in Kakuma, the field officer had to go a long way. Just as I've told you, the community is really dynamic and diverse in a way. So you'll find that the RLOs or the daycares are far apart from each other. And that means, like, for instance, the number of daycares a field officer will access in a week in the urban centers is not the exact number a field officer will access that is in the host community or in the refugee community. And also we have an aspect of the COPs. For the COPs in the camps, we had to facilitate also. just due to the matter of distance. Because for them to meet, you'll find that where they are meeting, their daycares are far away from the place they are meeting. So there was a need for facilitation, and whereby in the urban centers, we don't do the facilitation. And our biggest achievement that worked out in all the same, you'll find that through the COPs, there was a sense of belonging for the caregivers. They felt appreciated. They felt that they at least have someone who cares for them, keeping in mind that most people don't really value about the caregivers or people who tender for the small children. So we appreciated because through the trainings, mentorships, and the COPs, those are the daycare owners got to embrace our program. And what made us know that they had embraced our program, it's when they started charging. Because just as Martin has said, we really had a lot of community and parental engagements. You'll find that most of the refugees, they're used to, like, they have a bit of the donor dependency syndrome because they are not working, they don't have anywhere they are working. So that one had made them say that, no, maybe this one won't work. But through the community engagements and the parental engagements, parents even decided to come in with some in-kind payment. Others even decided to bring food to the center as a method of payment for services.
Edith, we're losing you a little bit, I think. Edith, sorry,
Edith,
we're losing
you're
you.
breaking, and I think you drive the point home. So one of the key success for social franchising program, ideally, is what Edith mentioned. So in terms of converting, in terms of a behavioral change point of view, transforming that community to resilience. It's from a point of now they are paying for the service. Parents were paying the caregiver, and then the caregiver were paying Kidogo, the franchising fee. For that matter, because we don't do it for free. We usually charge them franchising fee. But this time round, for Kakuma, we needed to adapt a little bit. The franchising fee was really low from what we would charge in different cases. One of the other support that I would want to mention is the support from UNHCR. There's a big flagship program that is being carried on by UNHCR Kenya, and that is called the KISEDEP, Kakuma Kalobei Integrated KISEDEP Integrated Program, where all the stakeholders from government of Kenya, big agencies that are big agencies, the big partners, the partners that are there locally, were coming together with this movement of pushing resilience in the camp itself. Ideally, in the refugee, in the refugee setup itself, both for the host and the refugees. So we relied on that. We just came in, and that was in 2022, when that flagship program was being initiated. So the first phase is over. Now we are in the second phase of the KISEDEP project. So there's that systemic support of whatever is happening in the Kakuma refugee camp, now with the big support from the Turkana County Kenyan government, Turkana County government, the local government over there, and now UNHCR. So yeah.
Sorry, Martin.
Awesome. Thank you to the entire Kidogo team for such a detailed presentation. Maybe we can take like 2 reflections, questions from the group, and then we can move on to Children and Crossfire's baseline findings, and then we can open it up for a slightly longer, larger group discussion. Any quick 1 or 2 reflections or questions? Awesome. Martin, if you want to maybe take the question, any of the questions that were shared around sustainability or access, we can do it right now or potentially also come back to that. But I think what I really found interesting sort of was the piece around how childcare is a lonely business and sort of how you run communities of practice, etc., to try and make sure that there's constant sort of conversation and discussions of learnings and best practices. So I found that to be very insightful. Maybe I can quickly open it up for children in Crossfire now. We can do a quick 10-minute, 12-minute presentation and then open it up for about 30 minutes for the entire group to engage in Q&A and sharing just reflection.
Okay, is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
My phone just buzzed. I hope it doesn't buzz again. All right, so welcome everybody. Karibu. I'm going to be presenting about Children in Crossfire's urban daycare support program that we run in Dar es Salaam. Children in Crossfire, as you know, we are an international NGO. We are based in Northern Ireland, and our focus for our international programs is the early years. We work in Tanzania and Ethiopia, and today I'm going to focus on our specific intervention in Dar es Salaam that we've been working on for just over a year now. Just to set the scene a little bit, this presentation will be very different from Kidogo's presentation. Kidogo are quite mature in the delivery of their program. We are just starting out, so I'm going to be presenting findings from our baseline and what learnings we're taking from the baseline as we design our program, as we design what components are going to be most effective for our context. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about the context itself, and then the findings, and then sort of our learnings and takeaways from our baseline data. And my colleagues are on the call as well. Craig, who's country director in Tanzania, Serafina, who's the lead on this project, the DAR daycare project, and Anita, who's leading on MEL in Tanzania. So if there's questions I can't answer, I'm sure they'll be able to answer some of your questions. We don't have all the answers yet. We're just starting out on the program itself. So we're here as much to learn as to offer our learnings. So just, why is this not changing slide? Oh, there you go. So just to set the context, Dar es Salaam is one of Africa's fastest growing cities. There's about 1 million children under 5 in Dar es Salaam, so demand is pretty big already and growing rapidly. It is a very quick urbanizing context, so a lot of families moving into the city, and they leave behind their family networks, and they're in a situation where they don't have any childcare options unless it's childcare that they're buying, in a sense. The other thing that we've realized working in this context is a lot of the signature artifacts of a protracted emergency are actually present in these high-density, low-income urban settings. And there's now a lot of research globally around this because, like it says, by 2050, 68% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. And if low and middle income countries want to keep prospering, if they want to keep growing economically and in terms of social development, then they have to answer this question of urbanization efficiently. And, of course, that's compounded by climate change, economic uncertainties, and this idea of household deprivation and what you see in a refugee setting is not very different from the kinds of household deprivation you see in urban settings, in low-income, high-density urban settings. And the other big parallel is the fallout of this deprivation is by and large borne disproportionately by women and children. So that's the other parallel going into this context that I think it's important to just sort of keep in mind as the background for all of this work. this was the process of our baseline. We did a mapping and a formative assessment. Then we did a program design to come up with, well, what do we want to baseline? Then we did the baseline, and now we're just starting implementation. So the baseline was from an economics perspective. So because this is a market system that the daycares operate in, we wanted to look at both the supply and the demand side of the sector. And the baseline, of course, was to inform the program, but also to inform the sector. And this is our sampling. There's 5 councils in Dar es Salaam. We picked 2 wards from each council and then 2 streets in each ward. And that's how we got our sample. It's about 100 daycare centers. So DCC stands for daycare center. And then 220 parents, about 200 people working in these daycares as the workforce. And then we also sampled children and tested their learning outcomes, both for 2 to 3-year-olds and then 3 to 6-year-olds. So what does provision look like typically in one of these centers? Now I'm going to rush through this data quite quickly because there is a lot of it. And we can come back to it and talk about specifics if you want to. So 90% of the daycares are actually privately owned. There is a policy gap for the 2 to 5-year-olds in Tanzania. So while there are guidelines on what daycares should look like, right? There are regulatory guidelines. There's no policy for provision, state provision. So it's not surprising that 90% of the daycares that are catering to the 2 to 5-year-olds are actually all private. 72% were actually established in the past 10 years. So this is a new market and it's a rapidly growing market. If you see that curve, you'll see. 78% of them are actually in rented premises, and of which 1/3 of them have only a 6-month lease period. And because we're talking about very high density urban areas, and space is at a premium, this is one of the main bottlenecks for daycares to become registered. And this is the type of contract, etc. The tuition fee, they are low fee because they charge between $6 and $10 a month. And this is the tuition fee. On top of that, all of them offer food, and they charge a supplementary amount for the food. And so it gives parents flexibility on, whether they want to buy the food from the daycare or not. Majority of the daycares, of course, operate informally. They're not registered for reasons that we've been talking about, space crunch, and lots of other input kind of regulatory factors like is there open spaces there, which are just not fit for the context, right? So a big challenge is this gap between what does the regulatory framework look like, and that's a one-size-fits-all regulatory framework for all of Tanzania, versus what can quality look like in a high-density, low-income setting in Dar es Salaam. And one of the big bits of implementation for us now is advocacy around this and getting government to sort of realize that the regulatory mechanisms may not be fit for this context, and to come to some sort of arrangement where we have a system where the urban daycares don't have to meet every regulatory item in order to become registered. And we can talk about that more later. So in terms of setting and in terms of size, I think it's important to mention here that it's very different from what Kidogo was describing. Right? So most of these daycares have either 2 or 3 rooms. They're set up as daycare centers. They're not usually mamapreneurs. They are business owners, micro-entrepreneurs, small business owners who own these centers, who may or may not have their children actually in the center. And it's on average about 80 children to a center. So it's not a home-based creche with 10, 12 children. It's a preschool in a sense. What is the workforce looking like? So more than half of the owners are female, and they're young. They're younger than 45 years old. Most of them have a secondary school degree, so there's a lot of human capital potential there. for training, for learning, for growing, and for building their livelihoods, but also for women's participation in the workforce. What kind of in-service training have they received, if any? So a lot of them have had training on technical aspects of ECD, this, how children learn, the science of ECD. But the fact is they are entrepreneurs, but they've had no training on, how to run a successful business. And what about their competency levels? Now, this is a self-assessment survey that we administered with them, and how comfortable they feel across these different aspects of teacher competency, really, right? And these are the workers who are in those classrooms with the children. And we found very few are actually meeting the competency framework. And this is, self-reported. So even in this, it's scoring so low. We've recently done a classroom observation exercise as well, where it is us observing the classroom. We are yet to analyze the findings of that, but our guess is that we will corroborate this in the classroom observation as well. What does the access for children and families look like? So what does the demand side look like? Even though these centers are supposed to enroll just these two age groups, right, 2 to 3 years and 3 to 5 years, we actually see 1/5 of them are enrolling younger children, and 2/3 of them are actually also enrolling older children. And this is another bottleneck when they're looking to get registered, because the government doesn't want them to be catering to these non-eligible age groups, in a sense. But it is a very mixed age situation. And why is it? It's because there's so much market demand. They'd rather continue to serve that age range than go and get registered with the government. So MVC, most vulnerable children, is a formal category in Tanzania. And the government defines very clearly who qualifies within this group of most vulnerable children. And these are all the different categories, right? And this is, going back to Craig's question of equity. And we are struggling with this ourselves in terms of designing the right kind of implementation. Most of these centers, about 60% of these centers said, yes, we do enroll some most vulnerable children from some of the categories. Of course, the most common category was children from extremely poor households. And in their own way, they are offering discounts on either food or the tuition, or discounts, if you have 2 siblings, you can pay a little less for the second child. So they're doing their own very informal kinds of processes and mechanisms to increase equity and to accommodate these vulnerable children into the centers. But there is no systematic approach or systematic support for this, either from the government or from anywhere else. When we looked at disabilities, the participation of children with disabilities is really low. Only 10% of children actually are in, 10% of the centers are actually enrolling children with disability. And the sense we had is, because there was also a household survey alongside this when we wanted to, go and measure younger children's learning. Most of the children with disabilities are actually home. They're not able to access. And that's why this question of equity is quite big in our minds. So this again goes back to this question of how are these centers supporting children who fall in this MVC category? And these are all the different ways in which they're doing it. And then just a little bit about the children's learning skills. As you can see, they are attending, but learning outcomes aren't great. And that's because the quality of the teaching in the classroom is not great. And this is, just the early learning component of the nurturing care framework. There is, of course, the health, nutrition, sanitation, all those other things that we also studied. I'm not presenting all of that data here. We have, the full report is more than 100 pages. And we've now prepared a little, 5 or 7 page brief that Priyanka has, I think, circulated. But yes, WASH also is a big problem, and it has to do with this wider issue of infrastructure and space that's available and the quality of the space that's available. So we are working on those other issues as well, but just a snapshot of, in terms of outcomes for children, what does the learning look like? And this is what it is. Who are the parents who are accessing these centers? 9 out of the 10 people who said they were the primary caregivers were women, mostly mothers. 70% of them are actually married, so they're pretty stable households in terms of the family setting at home. About half of them have completed primary school, but only 2 out of the 10 respondents said that fathers do contribute to childcare at home. So primarily, this is women who are in charge of the childcare. And so the burden of childcare disproportionately falls on the women. What that means is when there's no childcare service available, it affects the women more than it affects the men. 3/4 of the households have an income which is less than $4 a day. If at all they have an income, 70% of the parents, the demand side, are engaged in small business or small entrepreneurship. So they are usually buying or selling vegetables in the local market, or making small food items and selling those in the local market. Some of them are in domestic work. 10% of them actually had no income at all. But even half of them who said, yes, we do have an income, they say the income is very unstable and it can change from day to day. So that's the supply and the demand side. But why is there a gender question in all of this? And I've kind of alluded to this a little bit. So we have to understand that childcare and women's well-being is quite closely linked together. Like I was saying earlier, there's no policy for provision of services from the government for 2 to 5-year-olds, right? Both the supply side and the demand side are primarily made up of women, young women with some basic education. And that's a lot of untapped human capital potential there, from the point of women's participation in the economy, women's livelihoods, family well-being, all of those different issues. From the supply point of view, this is a very low margin, low growth sector. And so if the regulatory framework is such that it presupposes capital investments in infrastructure, in training, it's very difficult for these small businesses to put up that money upfront. So it remains in this very vicious low growth cycle where these women, they're running these businesses, but A, they're not sustainable, they're not a stable business, and B, they don't see a growth path in the business itself. So when we talk about livelihoods and women's livelihoods, I know there was a question in the beginning on livelihoods. So from the supply point of view, these businesses, these women entrepreneurs are not operating at the highest levels of internal efficiency, but there's no support for them to create those efficiencies. So access to loans and capital markets, for instance, would be great. Access to training on how do you offer better quality would be great. And that's something, as Children in Crossfire, is a comfort area for us, and we are doing that. But also, things like community of learners. We've tried that in our rural program that we do with government schools, and that is, part of our program plan is the community of learners. Higher parent engagement, so there's more transparency with the community and more awareness of good ECD practices. All of that, yes. So from the supply side, it's being able to, as a woman business owner, run a profitable, efficient business that is at the right level of supply and demand and price point in the market, right? The understanding of the intricacies of how the market works. That support, I think, would be very helpful. Then you come to the demand side and the livelihood support for the demand side. As quality increases, the price is bound to go up. That's just, how markets work. As the price goes up, there will always be a proportion of parents who can no longer afford the new higher fees. Because like I've said, there's already parents whose children are not able to access these centers. Some of the MVC children, some of the children with disabilities, you're already seeing that there's an equity issue because it's a market-led system. So what can we do to supplement livelihoods for these parents who are stuck in this cycle where their income is too low, they can't pay the childcare fees. Because they can't pay the childcare fees, they can't have a better income because they must be home and looking after their children. Right. So one is, of course, can there be a targeted voucher or some sort of supplementary income mechanism? The other is, can we enable access to existing government social welfare programs? Because they do exist in Tanzania, but not all the parents who are eligible are actually accessing those social welfare programs. So those are the two ways that we are thinking might be a way to almost supplement the existing livelihood rather than creating a livelihoods program in this space, in this context. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, why two-gen approaches are imperative. And I think I already kind of talked about this when I was explaining the previous slide. So I won't go into this in much detail. There's a couple of things that I wanted to flag. One is the partnerships and collaborations. CIC has its own strength areas, and we know what we know how to do. We are not good at doing business development training, right? So we are thinking of having partnerships with our other organizations that know how to do that for that piece of it. We know that health, nutrition, WASH, these are probably not our core areas. And so we're looking for partners on the ground who can help us on that aspect of things. The targeted voucher that I spoke about, again, we don't have expertise in that. And we're looking at other organizations. So we're looking at ourselves more as a convener, or the center of a collaborative program. A lot of our work is also to do with partnership with government and advocacy with government on, because this is an informal sector, it operates almost as a gray market. And because it operates as a gray market, there's no visibility for the government on what is going on in the sector. It's almost the sector so far has preferred to stay underground. So this baseline is actually one of the first pieces of data that is available in the public domain about what is going on in the sector. And government wants to use this baseline report now to design their own policies. So I think there's a big piece of work to be done in advocating for the right fit for context regulatory mechanisms. And that's a big piece of the work we're doing. So I think because this is, by design, ECD is multi-sectoral. And it's difficult for any one organization to have expertise in all these sectors. So one of the learnings, and I think one of the keys to success, will be to have strong partnerships across different sectors that address different aspects of the problem at hand. So that's all from me, really, and happy to answer questions and kind of go further in depth into some of this. I know I rushed through it because I wanted to leave time for questions.
Thank you, Kanupriya, for the detailed presentation. We can take maybe a few reflections and questions all together, and then have either sort of the Kidogo team and Children in Crossfire team take those questions on. So yeah, thank you to the audience for listening in and staying on. I'll just quickly open it up for any reflections and questions now. I see you've unmuted yourself, Dr. Lambati. Go for it.
I'm waiting for others first. This is just a comment, not a question. I found these two presentations amazing. And they, in a snapshot, told the reality of childcare globally. You just nailed it. All the issues you raised. I think my biggest concern going forward, and this is based on many years of watching other countries around the world, is that we cannot depend on a market-based system. And that we've got to have to be very clear about that. It's a transitional period, but it could end up being what we end up with. And so going hand in hand with advocacy efforts, as you mentioned in Children of Crossfire, and I know Kidogo does the same thing, to make sure that we are talking about the fact that we need public support for this. You can't, if you raise parent fees to pay providers, then certain parents won't be able to participate. We know that. The market doesn't work. So, and I'm not sure it's regulatory as much as it is support. So it's a different kind of mindset that we've got to create in the public sector. That is, public support, and it's going to take time, but we need to talk about it from the beginning. But, I just want to thank both of the presentations. They were fantastic.
I don't see a hand up. I don't know, Craig, Kanupriya, if you have sort of any response to that reflection. And also just circling back on the question of sustainability, I think Reza had to drop off, but he did sort of email his question around sustainability. If there is any feedback, reflection.
I just say thanks to Kanupriya as well for a really good presentation there as well on the baseline. I don't know. I'm when I fully hear Joan's comment there. I'm also questioning in the context we're seeing on the ground in Dar, to what extent the market system might not be a viable medium-term strategy for increasing coverage of quality childcare. From our observations on the ground, it is a thriving market for low-income households, and low-income households are depending on the childcare which is being provided in these largely unregistered daycare centres. And the parents themselves are reporting back almost unanimously that they are satisfied with the quality. They predominantly look at the aspect of safety and security for their children, but they are also satisfied with the feeding, with the general care and love of the care workers, etc. So it's also just worth understanding that our perspective of quality sometimes doesn't fully match up to the perspective of quality which parents are looking for. But my initial impression in going quite deep into the daycare sector here is that it's a promising market for childcare in a rapidly urbanizing context. My main question, and where I see the public potential or the potential of interventions into the market, as it were, is, as I was saying earlier, that at the end of the day, there's always going to be children excluded. And typically the poorest children whose households are not able to afford even those very low fees. I'm still to see the increase of quality leading to an increase of fees. Generally, because of the competition, fees are remaining relatively stable at very low levels, but still the poorest households are being excluded, and therefore the most vulnerable children with the most to gain as well are being excluded. And from that angle, that's where I feel that a market system exclusive approach is not the whole answer, but there does need to be some targeted intervention in order to ensure all children are able to benefit from access and indeed their caregivers. So that's just a quick reaction from my end.
Thank you, Craig.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
I just wanted, I wanted to get a sense of from Kanu Priya, from Children in Crossfire. Just wanted to get a sense of male involvement in ECD in Dar es Salaam, in the places where Children in Crossfire is working. Did the baseline look into this? To what extent are male or fathers involved in ECD? Could be in terms of raising the tuition and other care aspects. Can she throw light on that? And also, I would like to add my voice to the challenge raised by Lombardi and Craig about the effectiveness of the market system to supply ECD effectively in Africa, and in particular low income, high density, low income spaces like in our cities. I just want to get them to comment on, especially from the experiences of the West. What do they think, and to what extent do they think that government can actually support child care in such spaces? And what is the experience from the West? Of course, knowing that the West does not necessarily have the kind of cities that we have, with the kind of social and economic conditions, but we also know that there are some blighted spaces in cities in the West. And how have governments there dealt with the question of ECD, although it may not be exactly the same as our cities? Thank you.
So should I just say a couple points and then I'll let Craig also join in, unless there's other questions?
Go for it, KP.
Sure. So in terms of male participation on the supply side, when you look at owners, there was actually much more participation of men in ownership of the daycare centers. So they were, about 60% of the centers actually owned by men. Whereas when you look at the workforce, employed workforce in these daycare centers, it's primarily women. So there as well, we see a gender imbalance in ownership of assets, ownership of businesses, versus who is actually providing the labor, the childcare labor in these businesses. On the demand side, like I said, it was only about 2 out of 10 households that said, yes, men do spend time in childcare. So it is a very big difference, and it is a very big concern. And I don't know how we will solve it. So that's one. The second question you asked is actually a very interesting question, because I think some of these debates around gender are global debates right now. And I think what the pandemic showed us is, we think of countries in the West and the East, we think of countries in the global North, global South, we think of global majority countries, and we think of rich and poor countries, really, to put it bluntly. And we think that the problems are very different. I think that equity has been compromised over time across the world. And while countries are getting richer, countries that we traditionally thought of as low and middle income countries, while they are getting richer, there is a segment of people in those countries that remain poor. And similarly, we've seen equity being compromised in the West. So in the UK right now, 1 in 5 children is experiencing child poverty in the UK, which is one of the richest countries in the world. And one of the main election manifesto points, we have an election coming up this year, is on childcare and funding for childcare. And that was one of the things that the pandemic showed us is when children are home, when there's no schools, when there's no childcare, it affects the parents' participation in work. And that's how it affects the whole economy. So, the gender pay gap is very real across the world, regardless of what part of the world you live in. Access to childcare is a very big problem. And so I think we need to start thinking as a sector less in terms of rich and poor countries and the differences between countries, but more about rich and poor people and the differences within countries. So thank you for raising that point, because it is a very important point. And no, we haven't solved that problem in the West yet. I remember when I was studying, one of my teachers was in America, one of the main designers of the Head Start program. And I know, Joan, that you were involved in that as well. So I think there was a lot of really good thinking in it, but somehow it hasn't been able to benefit, or there hasn't been enough political will. There's been talk, but not enough money put towards it over time. Similarly, in India, we have one of the best designed 2-gen ECD programs in the Integrated Child Development Scheme. It was designed in the 70s. It was the first of its kind in a low and middle income country, but we haven't been able to fund it adequately. On paper, it's a great design, but we haven't been able to make the most of it. So yeah, I leave it at that. I could go on, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kanupriya. I'll give the last sort of question or response to Martin. And as he's answering, we'll also in a minute open the poll for your feedback on the session. And we'll come back and see if there's time for next steps.
I think on my side is just a response to Craig in regards to what is being done to, if we think about exclusion, one of the other things that we are trying, I think from our side, we are working with an organization called APHRC. So I think what we are utilizing right now is recognizing those sweet spots within government. So currently the Kenyan government has systemized the community health strategy. And then one of the things that we've been thinking through is, so as we run our programming, of course, there's millions and millions and millions of childcare that are not reached out. But in terms of mandate of the community health strategy, how can we utilize this government strategy that has taken many years in Kenya to institutionalize that department or institutionalize that sector as a whole. But right now, as soon as they institutionalize, is there a way we can plug in government effort? And we've done a feasibility study within 2 informal settlements in Kenya. It gave us a very positive response. But again, we are thinking about what does it mean at scale? And I think that's the second level that we are thinking about. And if that one works, I think, we don't know in terms of government support, in terms of as much as there's the market-based approach, what happens with this? So that's just an experiment that we are trying to think about, work with, just recognizing those sweet spots within government structures. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. And we're at time. If everyone can stay back a minute more and just fill in the poll, that'd be really useful for us. Quickly, in terms of next steps, our next session is on the 16th of April. We're going to talk about caregiver livelihood models again, but this time we're going to look at the VSLA model. We will share the details of the sessions closer to the date. Thank you so much for everyone who stayed back, and we're excited about doing the next presentation soon. Thank you, everyone, for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah,
And goodbye all.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.